Plug your ears if you're a BYU fan. Utah can pull off the craziest thing ever, and that's beat the Cougars in college football's biggest upset and ruin everyone else's season. This is a Locked On Utes, Locked On Big 12 crossover.
You are Locked On Big 12, your daily podcast on the Big 12 Conference. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Happy Tuesday, everybody. Welcome to a Locked On Big 12, Locked On Utes crossover. I'm Drake Toll from America's #1 Big 12 podcast, Locked On Big 12. That is JT Westercell of Locked On Utes. Thank you for making our shows your first listen every single day. Do I think that Utah is going to upset BYU? I don't know. We'll get there, and JT can make the case why the Utes can at this point play spoiler. And if you're listening to Locked On Big 12 thinking, well, I'm a Kansas State fan, here's why this matters for you. At this point, Utah can wreak havoc on the rest of the conference and create unique scenarios in the Big 12 championship game. Scenarios that Utah will not be a part of, but they can have their fingerprints, that is, at least there. In the middle segment, who is the most disappointing team in America? We're talking to Locked On Utes, so I think you kind of know where we're going with that one. And then we'll wrap it up with, is Kyle Whittingham done after this season? We predicted that preseason. Is it still true? If you hit subscribe, we get to keep our jobs. That would be great right now. I love having money that comes into my bucket in the months. JT, Utah, at this point, what are they playing for? That's where I'll start. What is Utah playing for, and is it the Holy War?
Pride, and I think probably the biggest thing then comes against your rival, right? The pride you would have in being able to beat your rival and being able to derail their season. I think what Utah is playing for at this point is, once again, like trying to stay a respectable program in terms of the fact that this team at this moment, I can't say they're going to a bowl game, is just wild from where the preseason expectations started. That would mean, and Utah right now seems poised to end the season with 4 straight losses, or not bad, like the final 4 games they'd lose, that'd be 8 straight losses overall. So the biggest thing Utah is playing right now for is like, hey, the pride and respect, like, hey, we're still Utah, we're a tough out. They haven't gotten blown out. Their defense has kept them in every single game that they've played so far. So this is not a team that I expect to roll over and just get stampeded by everyone that they're going to play. But yeah, the biggest thing Utah is playing for right now is pride. And I think by far the best thing that could happen to Utah the rest of the way is beat BYU, who did, of course, beat Utah the last time they played them.
Had you told me the games between BYU, Colorado, and Iowa State would all be games in which Utah was a top 10 school, and those 3 were unranked preseason, I was like, yeah, that's how it's going to go. Utah will be top 10. BYU, Colorado, Iowa State will be unranked. Now, there are likely 2 top 10 teams in that scenario, and the one that's not in the top 10 has the Heisman Trophy winner. But what that also means is those 3 schools are vying for a Big 12 championship right now, 2 of them undefeated, one of them a one-loss team in Big 12 play. Has Utah played the role of spoiler in a while? This is a very new approach for a Utah team that's usually in the driver's seat.
A very new approach for this Utah team. I mean, they haven't lost 4 straight games since 2017. The back-to-back home losses
also,
not since 2017.
I know we talk a lot about how like sad things for Utah. I'm drinking my IBC root beer, and it's with my Utah koozie because I'm being nice.
Does that say BYU on the bottom of it, Drake?
It says BYU.
Oh, it says BYU sucks. There you go.
I got it at the pig bus or something. I don't even know what they call it. It was some kind of tailgate thing, and I didn't know until recently. I was on the show and I was drinking my Utah koozie because I celebrate all Big 12 teams, and the bottom of it says BYU sucks. That is true hatred. We're coming upon the game where, again, Utah can play spoiler, but this is new uncharted territory.
They actually can't play spoiler. Drake, I appreciate you wanting to have me on to talk about this game because I've been feeling pretty gloomy about the current state of Utah football. But then you poise something, hey, do you feel like there's a chance that Utah can upset BYU? And at first I was like, I mean, no, right? One's a top 10 team. Utah is in the midst of a massive struggle right now. BYU should win the game. And right now I still expect BYU to. But this Utah team can present some challenges. I mean, BYU is on a roll right now, right? 8-0, but they haven't faced a top 20 defense yet. Funnily enough, with how bad Utah's been, they currently have the best defense in the Big 12 right now, the highest ranked, 17th ranked in total defense. They are now barely ahead of Iowa State as of late. So they're the only other defense, too, that BYU has played inside the top 50 is SMU, who held them to 18 points, right? And even you could say, like, I'm using a little bit of like a narrow stat margin because I'm talking about top 50. Kansas State right now ranks 51, but BYU's offense did not go on these long methodical drives against Kansas State. They had some turnovers and some special teams plays, and credit BYU for finding a way to win. But that's what they've been able to do consistently, right? There's a reason that UCF was favored. I don't think they should have been, but the fact that they were in the first place kind of shows you, hey, Oklahoma State hasn't won a game in the Big 12. We're a miracle play away late from beating BYU on their home field, right? So BYU has been awesome so far this year, right? They're looking like a team of destiny, but they haven't looked invincible. And I think Utah's defense, the fact that they're playing at home, the craziness that this rivalry will bring, will give Utah a chance to get an upset against the Cougars.
I went to Bologna High School, and we played Greenbrier every year. And one year they had a kid named Neil Burcham. And Burcham was going to SMU, which was unheard of for our area, right? And all we wanted to do at Bologna was beat undefeated. We weren't going to the playoffs. We weren't very good. It's just about, if you won that game, the rest of the season really didn't matter all that much. And it's a spot that Utah's now placed in. If you ask the analytics, yes, the total defense numbers are good, JT. The efficiency numbers are not. Utah 69th, nice, against the rush, 39th against the drop back in EPA. BYU is both very good at running and throwing the football. And right now, analytics would tell you BYU is going to win this game 34-17, which isn't very close, but the Utah offense has stalled out so much. And we're going to get into a bit in the middle segment of who there is to blame for that. But if you're the Utah Utes, and this was going to be an entire segment, but I'll limit it to one answer from you because it could get gloomy. Will you go to a bowl game?
Right now, I'm going to say no. I also, as of the time we're recording this, I do not expect Utah to beat BYU. Based on how these two teams have looked, you can't say that. I am relying on Utah forcing turnovers, which BYU has turned it over 14 times, right? Retzlaff has thrown 7 interceptions. There's 7 fumbles as well there. So BYU has shown a propensity to turn it over at times. I'm factoring in on Utah's defense stepping up, creating some pressure. They haven't gotten home with sacks, but they have done a good job still limiting teams. Like against Houston, they got gashed, but it was bend, don't break. They did not let up touchdowns. That's something Utah has done a good job of too, right? And I think one thing that Utah still has is while the quarterbacks are struggling right now mightily, you still have Mekhi Bernard, who's 17th in the country in rushing yards, 782 yards. BYU ranks 70th against the run. If this Utah team over these next 2 weeks can come up with a game plan, change things up and show something new on tape, or just do something new, right? That's not on tape. That's where you're going to try to catch the Cougars by surprise, rely on your defense and the crazy home field advantage that is normally Rice-Eccles Stadium. But it's going to be very hard. BYU should win this game, but I do not think you can overlook Utah with the way their defense has been playing Utah's, as well as the fact that BYU has not been a dominant team. They've been a really good team, and they deserve to be in the top 10. It's a joke what's going on with the AP poll, but they have not been a dominant team.
Yeah, I think if it's any consolation, there are plenty of Colorado fans that are rooting for Utah to win against Iowa State and BYU. Plenty of Kansas State fans who are rooting for the same thing. So Utah has some allies here down the stretch based on, again, the havoc they can create. Coming up, who is the most disappointing team in the country? And maybe Utah's there, but I have a case for a team not named Utah that's still in the Big 12. This is a Locked On Utes, Locked On Big 12 crossover, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your first listen every day and your team every day. Today's show is brought to you by Roy. Roy is changing the NIL game by allowing you to give directly to student athletes that you want to support. So if you want to keep your favorite player at Utah, bring back Cam Rising, you can go to Roy and support Cam Rising directly. We have pulled over $20,000 to support players this season with the Roy app. It's ROI. You can directly support those athletes. And if they transfer, you get your money back. If they don't deliver the content you pay for, you get your money back. This week, I'm supporting Matt Jones of the Baylor Bears. Why? Defensive Player of the Week in the Big 12 this week. And the Baylor Bears won, my alma mater. So I pitched in $100. That's right, $100 to Matt Jones, as did Cameron Stewart. We went toe-to-toe for that one, the host of Locked On Baylor. Even $10 would make a difference. Don't miss out on Roy's exciting giveaway. 2 tickets to any game in November if you use referral code Locked On. Download Roy now and join the NIL game with no subscriptions and no fees. Be sure to check us out on Instagram, Facebook, and X at Roy_return on you for more info. That is Roy. Support the players, change the game. JT Wistersill of Locked On Utes. I'm going to give this to you first. It's a bit of a trap question, but it's a valid question. Who is, and if you asked SP Plus, oh boy, the team that you represent is right there. Who is the most disappointing team in America in 2024?
It is the Florida State Seminoles, number 1. The Utah Utes, number 2. Florida State's the most disappointing team. Florida State was ranked inside the top 10. Florida State is 1-7 currently versus Utah is 4-4. They are only, of their last 4 games for Florida State, only one has been within 1 score. So it's insane how bad Florida State has been. You look at the loss to Memphis too. They beat Cal, but outside of that, just an abysmal year for the Seminoles. The year has become abysmal for Utah, but it did not start this way. They still have wins at Oklahoma State. They beat Baylor. They took care of business early on in the season. They're a mess right now. Once again, they are the second most disappointing team, but they have 3 more wins than Florida State. Florida State was projected to finish higher. A lot of people are still thinking Florida State was going to win the ACC, and that did not come to fruition. So right now, Florida State is the most disappointing team. But when you look at the preseason expectations that were placed at Utah, and I'll take some blame for that as well. I thought this team was capable of doing a lot too. They have completely fallen short of that. Some of that has to do with injuries, but a lot of that also has to do just players not playing up to the standard that they'd either played up to in the past or just are struggling mightily right now. So Utah is the second most disappointing team. I mean, everyone was picking this team to win the conference, basically. Look at College Game Day. I think they all picked Utah to win the Big 12. It wasn't just a preseason poll. It was more than that. This Utah team is underwhelmed. Injuries play a role, but more than anything, there are a lot of issues that just extend from the coaches down to the players on the field that have made this season for Utah, honestly, you could argue the biggest disappointment in Utah football history.
I was just pulling it up here. Based on SP Plus preseason projections, here are the teams that are underachieving the most in America. At 134, Oregon State, 133, Liberty. At this point, okay, so when do we finally get a team we recognize? 129, the worst Big 12 team, according to SP Plus, in the underachieving category, the Utah Utes. Which makes a lot of sense, being to me, a top 10 preseason school, and now struggling to make a bowl game. Obviously, Florida State's up there, but I want to make a case that Oklahoma State is worse than Utah. And the reason why, Utah returned a lot of production, but they also returned production that was based on 2022. I looked at this Utah roster and said, okay, if they can replicate what they had in 2022, guys that were hurt last season, whether it be the entire season or banged up for most of the year, who were coming back into the fold this year, we had not seen them healthy during the duration of a season since Tom Brady. You mentioned this, since Tom Brady was playing NFL football. So I had built the idea of the Utah Utes being an elite college football team around how they were that season and what they were brought back from production that year into this year. For Oklahoma State, I watched these same guys do it last year. Alan Bowman to Ollie Gordon. And it's maybe the wildest stat of this whole deal. 20 of 22 starters came back for Oklahoma State. 20 of 22 from last season with the Doak Walker Award winner, 3 elite wide receivers, and a quarterback who's been in college for a really long time. And they too will be the most disappointing team in the Mike Gundy era, and his first to go below 500 based on the way they're playing right now, and they can't even string a football season together. Do you feel like, as a Utah fan, then you can look at an Oklahoma State or a UCF or an Arizona and say, well, they underachieved too, so we don't feel as bad? Did you get any reprieve from how terrible Oklahoma State is?
I guess a little bit. It's nice to not be the only bum team in the Big 12, basically. Like it's been very rough.
The only team with a winning record out of the preseason top 5 in the Big 12, Kansas State. That's it. Other 4 are below 500.
Which is crazy. Also, it's wild. We've talked a lot about the similarities between Kyle Whittingham and Mike Gundy. The fact that both of them are in the midst of such a rough season. There could even be a bigger conversation about that, about older college football coaches that have managed to stick around for a while, but maybe haven't been able to adapt to the changes as much. Talking about Oklahoma State. So to me, they're really disappointing. And at least with Utah, you're right. Like we can at least say, hey, Cam Rising's hurt. This is just the truth. Some people are going to take this as an excuse. If Utah scored 25 points every game this season, they would have 1 loss on their record right now. When Cam was last healthy in 22, Utah averaged 38 points per game. So that's part of the reason that we were very high on this Utah team. Right now, I don't know. The games probably would have changed. So maybe that wouldn't have held. And either way, this Utah team probably would have underwhelmed even if Cam was healthy based on what's played out so far. But in the case of Oklahoma State, gosh, just so many fraudulent kind of games last year, right? The South Alabama loss 33-7. I look at the UCF game 45-3, even against Texas 49-21. There was only one game Utah got blown out last year's team, even with backups and everything. And that was the Arizona game. And they were down Also, they're like top 4 guys on defense too. So I just looked at this Utah team like when you have a top 5 run defense coming back, you have a history of producing NFL defensive backs. Cam Rising's coming back. Brant Keithy's coming back. Like I said, 38 points per game when they were healthy. I didn't see this team being bad. The reason they were picked to win the conference is because experience is usually a good thing. But man, it has not been for this year too. And just some of these players have not performed up to their standard. Utah's tackling issues have been wild to watch play out. Utah's been out coached frequently. For how we could have before the season, I could have seen how Oklahoma State and same thing with UCF and even Arizona in some ways was what they lost would be where they were. Drake, there was no scenario that I saw Utah lose in Houston. Like how did that? I just can't believe that's what happened. And that's why to me, Utah is one of the biggest disappointments in all college football, only behind 1-7 Florida State.
Really hope that we see you on the squad show Thursday, by the way. I was going to leave the Houston thing for the squad show, but holy cow. Who do you blame? Who do you blame for this collapse?
You know what? Number one, I will go Kyle Whittingham. He's the head coach. I think that there has been a number of things where, Utah's whole thing, like you will become us, not we will become you, has been an issue. I just feel like there's a lot more things they could have been doing sooner on offense to support Isaac Wilson. The missed tackling issues, the injuries, the way some of those things have been handled. Like if we're going to break it down to like who's not executing on the field, I've said this multiple times, like it's the quarterbacks by far. Like every game there are plays to be made. Utah, even when Mekhi Bernard, even against Houston, he's averaging 3 yards per carry. You run it twice, that still gets you to 3rd and 3. You just need to get one pass then basically. And that's what it came down to Utah so often, right? Is they could not convert on 3rd down because their passing offense makes me want to just throw myself into a wall basically every time I watch them play. So number one, I blame Kyle Whittingham just because he is the head coach. He's the one in charge of all of this. But at the end of the day, when you don't have a quarterback and Utah does not, it's very hard to win games in college football. And it's so wild. Like we said, like, yes, you drove into some of the advanced analytics of why Utah maybe doesn't have the best defense in the Big 12. But at the end of the day, Utah's defense every single week has given this team an opportunity to win. And on the offensive side of the ball, they have consistently squandered it due to coaching and quarterback more than anything else.
Yeah, Utah's offense 92nd. Oh, even worse. 93rd against the rush this season, EPA wise, and then 102nd, not against, but that is running the football offensively, 93rd, and then throwing the football 102nd out of 134 FBS teams. That is not very good. Coming up, is Kyle Whittingham done after this year? Certainly not fired. I wouldn't ever make that case, but he could hang it up. We thought he was going to. Will things change based on how this year went? This is a Locked On Utes, Locked On Big 12 crossover, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's show is brought to you by FanDuel. FanDuel is where I go to say, hey, I think the Baylor Bears are really going to put it on the Oklahoma State Cowboys. I haven't had a lot of confidence in my alma mater here recently, but they've been good the last 2 weeks. So why not throw some money on them? And I did at America's #1 sportsbook, FanDuel. New customers right now get $5 for, more. I'll give you even more. I'll give you $150 if you put a $5 bet down if you win that $5 bet. So $150 in bonus bets if you win a $5 bet that you put down. And you can bet on the NFL, you can bet on college football, you can bet on games live. You get a hunch in the middle of a game, you know what, I think this team's going to come back. I'm going to put some money on their money line or their spread. Middle of the game, you check the latest stats, view live play-by-play, all on FanDuel, and then submit a bet. That is at FanDuel.com. Again, get started with $150 in bonus bets if you win your first $5 bet. That is FanDuel.com. Never waste a hunch and make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL. JT Westercell of Locked On Utes. We talked a couple months ago, and it wasn't that controversial, that this could be the final year for Kyle Whittingham at Utah. A successor was put in place. It felt like this was the season where Utah had to do something. They would have to do something monumentally bad to miss the college football playoff, and now that's where we are. Do you expect Witt to hang it up on such a low note? Because we were ready for the highest note and for him to have a swan song.
I don't know anymore. And when I brought up those predictions in the past, those were always just, once again, like what I felt like was going to happen. It wasn't like, I was hearing this is Kyle Whittingham's last year. Here's what I looked at heading into the season. Named a successor. Also, literally at media day says, I probably won't be here in 2027. Like, does a coach say that if he's not strongly considering retirement? He was on Jim Rome's show and said he was day to day. So I still believe that like Utah wanted this to be the swan song, like you said. Utah could ride off into the sunset with Kyle Whittingham. They make the college football playoff, do something they hadn't done before in history, maybe win the Big 12. And and then exit stage left from there. But this has just been a disaster. And do you want this to be your last season if you're Kyle Whittingham? I don't know. I mean, the program has been able to run itself in the past. So I don't know how much on like the day-to-day operations, like does he need to do in a point of where can he not give it one more run back? I got to believe he's strongly considering that, right? Does he really want this to be his final season? Originally, I thought he did when it was going to go to form and everything was going to be good. But I wonder with the competitor that Kyle Whittingham is, and I've heard he's a crazy competitor. That much I have heard. Does he really want to go out on the worst season he's had? I mean, this is a Utah team that haven't been under 500 since 2013. And literally, once again, what I think will probably go down as the most disappointing year ever for Utah football. Do you want that to be your final year? Maybe you're fed up with the current state of college football. Maybe you're ready for Morgan Scalley to take over, whatever it is. But I just feel like I really don't know. I genuinely don't know. He might come back for one more year, or he might be fed up with everything and be done. It's just wild. We're here, and I have no idea what Kyle Whittingham wants to do as normal, because Kyle loves to keep things close to the vest.
I'm going to ask you to speculate here, which is always tough, but we'll tiptoe around it a bit. From the rhetoric you've gotten in a Kyle Whittingham press conference, which the guy says sometimes a lot, sometimes nothing. You're like, okay, crazy Uncle Kyle showed up this week, or he's just the most mellow coach speak guy in the world. Have you gotten the sense that he's tired or worn out, or that college football, similar to how it did Nick Saban, has passed by Kyle Whittingham?
I would say no. I'm thinking about like how he handled his press conferences last year. I mean, I will say he's probably still just tired and frustrated about all the injuries and things there. But there's just cracks in the armor this year with Utah. There haven't been in the past. Mekhi Bernard in the post-game press conference was asked, what's wrong with this Utah football team? Mekhi says, I know, but I'm not going to say it. What? Utah doesn't do that. That's not the type of thing that happens at Utah, but now that is starting to happen, right? You get the cryptic tweets from all the players frustrated about their roles. I think Dorian Singer, like a week or two ago, put something on his Instagram story about how basically he was being wasted and he was frustrated about his use in the offense. Like there's just things are changing with this Utah football team. You know, Andy Ludwig stepped down because he didn't have answers, right? Like Utah not having answers, like that one of your offensive coordinators saying he doesn't have answers. And that whole situation is obviously a whole mess in of itself of everything there. But I don't know. I really don't. I feel like Kyle right now, if I had to switch, I would maybe think he comes back for one more year, but I feel so 50-50 right now. He might be burned out, and it might be better for Utah to move forward with Morgan Scalley. You can't move on from Kyle Whittingham. He's Kyle Whittingham. He's done everything, but like in the modern world of college football, it might be better to let Morgan get a run at it than give Kyle another year. I really don't know what he wants to do. He's very frustrated. Clearly, Utah poured a lot into this season, and it has not gone to plan at all, especially like, I mean, it just hurts, but like if Isaac Wilson and Brandon Rose are your quarterback options next year, and I still think there's a chance Isaac can be better next year, but it's hard to see yourself contending in the Big 12 right now with the way Isaac Wilson and Brandon Rose have looked. And that's just literally based on how they've played. So yeah, I really don't know what Kyle's going to do here. I really feel 50-50 on it. This has changed so much since the season started. I got to believe, because this is not the fairy tale ending that he had hoped. It has instead been a brutal disappointment for Utah.
You know, JT, the optic of ushering out, that's the way I'm going to put it, ushering out your offensive coordinator. This wasn't you know what, you're right, bye. I do believe there was pressure for Ludwig to step down. Can you retire off of that? Can you usher out your OC, miss a bowl game, and say, I've had the most legendary career of anyone at Utah. They're going to build a statue of me. Good night, 4-8.
I mean, if you don't feel you're the best person to run the program any longer, I'm not saying Kyle Whittingham does that, but who did we just see do it? Tony Bennett at Virginia felt he was no longer the best person to run that basketball program. With the current state of college football and the way this season has gone, Kyle Whittingham may just decide at the end of this, I don't want to deal with this anymore. Once again, there's two ways to look at this. You could look at it from, this is not how Kyle Whittingham wants to go out, but you could also look at it from the standpoint of, I'm done. If Kyle Whittingham might just be like that, I'm done. I've accomplished so much with this team. They are going to build him a statue, as we mentioned. Yeah. The ending was not fantastic. A lot of coaches don't have fantastic endings to their career, by the way. I think about so many legendary coaches who doesn't go their way their final season, and that's definitely not gone Utah's way so far. So really fascinated to see what Kyle Whittingham will do. I'd be curious too, like, what's the timing of this announcement? Would they make it before the bowl game if it happens? I feel like if he doesn't make it before the bowl game, then the odds are more likely that he comes back. Just because I don't think he's a farewell tour type of guy, but the university might feel the pressure of being like, hey, like, you're Kyle Whittingham. Like, we want to give you at least this month to celebrate you. So a lot up in the air with Kyle Whittingham, a lot up in the air about the future of Utah football. This was a team that for the last 5 years has been a top 25 college football program. They are so far from that right now that there is a chance this has long-term ramifications to their culture and just the program that they've built. It is hard to see any world where this team starts next year ranked in the top 25 too. And that is wild that we are talking about this in what was supposed to be Utah's year to make a run and do something historic. And instead they have absolutely face planted.
Let's leave you with this, JT. If this is the final season for Kyle Whittingham, how does that affect his legacy at Utah, given this is the last impression fans will get?
I don't think too much. I think there will be a little bit of a sore taste in the mouth for how the season turned out. But I think at the end of the day, you look at all of the great things that Kyle Whittingham did, and one disappointing season in the Big 12 cannot dwarf those 2 conference championships that Utah was able to win in the Pac-12. To be Utah from the Mountain West, like just the crazy rise they had, to be that team that was under 500 a couple of those years, to find a way to beat the likes of USC and Oregon, not just once in a season, but twice in both of those years. Like, that's massive. The reason Utah football is what it is today is because of Kyle Whittingham, and that cannot be lost just because these last 2 years have not been very good by the past standard. But Kyle Whittingham, we already said, build him the statue. You know, they call it Saban Field at Alabama. I'd love to see Whitfield at Utah. I think he's absolutely deserved it, or something there, even more so than just the statue. What Kyle Whittingham has meant to Utah football's elevation can't be put into words. We talked a lot about how Utah, if they could, would have loved to be invited into the Big Ten, and Utah wasn't quite up to the caliber of those other schools yet. But the only reason that Utah was in the conversation for the Big Ten, and the only reason that Utah was let into the Big 12, is because of what Kyle Whittingham has done for this program. He, in my opinion, is the best coach they've ever had, and he is still overall one of the current best coaches in college football, but might be time to leave.
He's a legend. He's a legend. JT, for the listeners of Locked On Big 12 who want to follow more Utah Utes jazz, and by the way, there are very few, I'm going to say this, there are very few team beat reporters, as you are. You're a beat reporter for Utah. You report on the Utah Utes and only the Utah Utes at Locked On Utes, that will tell it like it is, be straight up, and not be afraid of some sort of repercussion, negative repercussion, or the fan base being upset. People who call it like it is when it's good and when it's bad. JT Westersill is one of those, whether you like it or not. Where can folks find more of your work?
Thank you very much. I appreciate that. At Locked On Utes, can follow on X and on YouTube as well. We'll be talking a lot about what's to come for Utah, and always a blast joining you on these shows, Drake. Thanks for having me on.
It's a big risk being objective, but JT does it. This has been and always will be. You come back the rest of the week. We'll give you all kinds of breakdown from Utah to everybody else in the Big 12 and those contending at the very top of the conference on a Locked On Big 12 and a Locked On Utes. Thanks for making it your first listen every single day. Crossover. This has been Locked On Utes and Locked On Dose Grande.